So we wrote a test for our app. We saw how to debug our tests. We also saw how to generate code for a test using the code gen. But it still feels like we haven't really tapped into the potential of what the test function can do. So inside this file, we have this test function that lets us describe what a test is. It's got a lot of things that can help us in grouping and maintaining our tests, improving the test reports, or even running hooks or lifecycle methods. So let's see how we can do that. There are a few helper methods that I believe could come in handy for some of you guys. So let's first look at those methods. There's the test.skip method, which tells Playwright to skip a particular test. So if you have a specific test or a group of tests that are not applicable under a certain configuration, like say for instance, a test that's only supposed to run on Chromium and not other browser engines, you can use this method and Playwright won't execute those tests. So if I use test.skip for this and I run my test suite, you'll see that one test was skipped and the rest 3 passed. Actually, we have one extra test that got added while I was demoing the VS Code extension. So let me go ahead and delete that file. I'll delete this one. The other 2 tests come from this example file. So these 2 tests and the one that we just deleted, they were executed. And this test for which we use the skip method got skipped. There's also test.fail, which tells Playwright that this test won't succeed. So Playwright will ensure that it fails, and if for some reason it doesn't fail, then Playwright will raise an issue. You'd normally do this when you know that some feature in the app is not yet ready. So if I replace skip with fail, and let me actually remove this user 1. So this test now should ideally pass. I'll clear this. Also, this time I'll only run this particular file. So pnpm pw test auth. Now ideally Playwright should raise an issue saying that actually before doing that, let me also run the app. So pnpm dev. Now Playwright should ideally raise an issue that it's passed when it's supposed to fail. Yeah, you'll see that it was expected to fail, but it passed. So this is what happens when you use test.fail for your test, and if it's expected to fail, it should fail, or else Playwright will raise an issue. Test.fixme is something similar to test.fail, but instead of running the test in the previous scenario, in this case, Playwright won't run the test. Again, as the name suggests, if you think that a test has issues in it, you should mark it with test.fixme. Then there's the test.slow method, which you'd normally use when you know that a test could take some extra time, and you would not want Playwright to use the same timeout duration for this test. So every test that we write is going to have a timeout counter. If the test is still executing beyond that timeout duration, it will simply stop. So if you already know that a test could take some extra time, then you can pass in test.slow, and Playwright will then automatically increase the timeout duration for this test by 3 times. If you want to run only a single test, you can use the only method. So if I replace this with only, now if I try to run the entire test suite, so let me do that. So this will run all the tests that we have inside the auth file and also the example file. It will at least track all these 3 files, but it will run only this test because we have passed in the only method to this test. One more very important method is the describe method, which can be used to group tests. So you'd normally have modules in your application that handle some part of the application. So segregating will be an important step to improve maintainability. Let's add our test as well inside a describe method. So I can use test.describe, and inside here, I'll just remove my test. So this is how you'd group your tests for a particular module. Any other tests that you need to add for authentication specific use cases, you can put them inside this group. I also can give it a name. So let me just give it like dummy group for now. And that's how you'd create a group. The methods that we saw earlier, the skip method, the only method, the fixme method, all these can be applied on this group as well. If I want to skip this group, then I'll just pass in skip at the end. Test.use is one more important method that you can use to specify some options for a test or a test group. So just like I used to pass options inside the Playwright config file, I can do the same here specifically for this file. So if at the top I set test.use and I pass in headless as true, now all the tests inside this file will run in headless mode. You won't see a new browser window opening up for this test. It will run in the background. That's how you use the test.use method. You can pass in options specific to a test file. There are a few advanced methods as well for very rare scenarios. You can read about them in the docs if you want. I have linked it in the description. Now there's also a specific set of methods called hooks that let you perform some actions at various intervals of your test. There are essentially 4 of them. There's before each, there's before all, there's after each, and there's after all. Pretty straightforward to be honest, but before each runs before each test. You'd normally use this when you want to set up something before each test to have like a fresh state. Before all runs once before all the tests inside a file or a group. Setting up global configurations or backend connections could be one of the use cases for a before all hook. After all and after each is used as a teardown mechanism since they run after everything inside a test has been executed. So anything that you have to terminate would be done in these hooks. Now you also have an option to tag or annotate your tests. Tagging your tests has a couple of advantages. One, you can run specific tests based on their tag. The second advantage is that you also get to filter your test logs based on their tag. So let me add some random tag to our test here. We can do this by changing the second param. I'll pass in an auth tag here. So you need to have the @ symbol when you are creating a tag. Now I'll save this, and if I try to run this, let me open up the report now. Now inside this report, right next to the test, you'll see this tag. So if there are like a bunch of tests here, a few of them have this auth tag. If I click on the auth tag, it will just filter all the tests with this auth tag. If you only want to run the tests that have this tag, then you can use the grep option in the test command. So pnpm test, the grep option, and you pass in the tag name. So it's now going to run only this particular test. You can also convert this tag into an array of tags if you want to provide multiple tags to a particular test. This tag will also work for groups, so you can tag groups as well. Now a more detailed version of a tag is an annotation. It's when you want to attach some metadata to the test but want it to be more descriptive for any reason. So you pass in an object with a type and a description as its keys. That is how you define an annotation. So instead of this tag, I'll replace it with annotation, and this is now going to be an object. Inside this object, I'll have the type, let's just call it issue, and a description. There is some issue. Once it's done, and let me actually run it. Inside the report, you'll find a separate section for annotations, and you'll find the annotation here. Now, since a lot of these utilities are in some way connected to the configuration, let's also quickly explore the config file as well. I actually did not go through this initially, but now that we are playing around configurations for a test, let's just go through this file. So we had looked at some options like the test directory. It's where Playwright is going to look for your test files. The fully parallel option is used so that Playwright runs all the test files in parallel. It does that using multiple worker processes, so it's effectively using the system resources as efficiently as possible. You'll see another option here that lets you set the number of workers to be used for parallel processing. Playwright caps the workers in a CI environment to manage system overload, as there could be multiple other processes running on that same machine. Then we have this forbid only option. This essentially forbids you from having only in your test suite. So the only method that we saw earlier, locally it's fine to have it sprinkled inside your test suite, but in the CI environment, if you have only in your suite, that's literally what Playwright will focus on, and it will ignore the rest of the test cases. If there's an error in any of these skip test cases, then it won't be picked up, and usually after CI, your application is deployed to production. So this error will also be shipped to the production bundle without being noticed by the test suite. That's primarily the reason why you should be forbidding the only method in a CI environment. Locally it's fine, locally it's not a problem. Then we have the retries option, which is basically the number of retry attempts per test. So if a test fails, it's going to retry for a couple of times here when it's in the CI environment. Eventually, if it's still not working, then it will just fail. The reporter option is a way of displaying your test reports. Up until now, we looked at the HTML reports that were generated after a test suite execution. There are some other formats too, like dots, lists, but the HTML format is the most informative format, so I'll stick to that. The use option lets you pass different type of settings across all the tests. Earlier in this video itself, we saw the test.use method, which essentially does the same thing but for a specific file. This is more of a global version of it. It has all kinds of options to configure, like the ones we already have here for recording purposes. It has options to emulate a real device like a mobile phone or a tablet. It has options to configure different network settings and scenarios. I'd recommend you to check out the test option section in the docs, as it has a bunch of configuration options that might come in handy for your use case. The projects option lets you run your tests in multiple environments. We looked at how our tests ran in the Chromium engine, the Firefox engine, and the WebKit engine. You can also do the same for specific mobile devices. Each of these projects also has a use option. So whatever you are passing inside this use option object, you can also do the same inside these individual project specific use options. The web server option at the bottom here will run a local dev server before the test suite execution begins. We'll see a more real life use case for this in the next video when we take a look at the CI environment. So yeah, that's some of the important configurations that we have in our project. Again, do give the docs a read if you want to dig deep. So that's most of the things that I normally use in my test environment with respect to the test function. Playwright is a huge library. There's obviously a whole lot more that you can get out of it. So yeah, I might sound like a broken record, but please do take a look at the docs. It's very well written and can give you some ideas on things that you might need for your own testing environment that you might not get from this tutorial series. In the next video, we'll take a look at how we can run our test suite on a CI environment. So do subscribe for that, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.